Okay, so welcome everyone to today's launch. We're very excited to share the findings from our research titled Unlock Innovation with Psychological Safety, why it's time to face up to the challenges of a polarised world. I'm Andy Dent. I'm the head of new business and marketing at the Oxford Group and a principal consultant. And just to give you a little bit of background about the Oxford Group for those of you that maybe don't know us so well, we've been unlocking leadership and management potential, enabling the world's top businesses to thrive for over 30 years, in fact, 35 years this year. And we do that by combining our coaching, facilitative, and experiential approach to support managers and leaders to create those conditions for success. So those of you that are joining us live today will be sharing the recording and the research paper with you all in the next couple of days. So you'll have that sent over to you directly. You're all going to be on mute. So if you've got any questions, please use the Q&A box, or you can use the chat function if you want to connect with any of the panelists today. We've also activated the live transcript or subtitles for today's session. If you want to switch these off, you can do that by deactivating the subtitles by clicking on live transcript, and then you can hide, there should be an option there to hide the subtitles. So our journey to today started with an observation firstly, and then a question. So we were noticing and observing, it was pretty hard not to, and I'm sure you'll all have been noticing as well, that we're living in a really, really divisive and polarizing time. And in our work with clients, we started to notice people's differing views started to creep in. Those opinions on non-work, geopolitical, social justice, or current affairs opinions, they started to seep into discussions in the work that we were doing with participants and managers and leaders around the world, noticeably more than they had before. And that led us to kind of ask the question, how are these polarizing views affecting psychological safety within organizations? And what we're going to do is we're going to walk you through the journey that we've traveled over the last 6 months to answer this question and our findings. So firstly, let me introduce our speaker panel today. So first, I'm going to hand over to Dil Pazir.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Dil Pazir. I've been in the leadership and employee development space for a decade now, and I've had the pleasure of co-authoring this paper. I've also special interest in learning content and tech strategy, and I've also the honor of coaching as an ITF accredited coach. Rebecca?
Hi, so I am Rebecca Berry. I'm a Research and Insights Director at Shift Insight, and we are a market research consultancy who specialise in education all the way down from early years right the way up to professional organisations as well. So the CPD and training part. So I'm a specialist in qualitative research, and I've been a qualitative researcher for around a decade now. And I'll hand over to Gary.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I'm Gary Shewan. I'm a learning development consultant at Legal & General. I've worked in learning development for about 30 years now, and I've enjoyed the last 2 years working really closely with Andy and the Oxford Group.
Thank you. So welcome, everyone. Thank you all to all the panelists for joining us today. So I just want to build on what Andy was saying at the beginning of the webinar. So what we're noting, and I'm sure you've noticed this too, is that in our communities outside of work, we're noticing some really strong opinions on a range and spectrum of issues. And the range of those opinions can sometimes go to a point where they're a little bit, they can come to each end of those spectrums. So opinions on environment, opinions on Black Lives Matter, opinions on who we should vote for, right wing, left wing. Now, the question we were asking ourselves is, when those same communities outside of work who are really passionate and committed and vocal to a point of cancelling the other opinion, then come to their workplace and those two communities kind of come together, what has happened to their bonds of trust? And how are they building that relationship where they're allowing each other to be safe enough to share their opinion, to hear others critiquing that opinion in order to find the best, and if you like, purified thought and purification of that idea. So we wanted to do a kind of a robust job at answering this question. So we invited Rebecca Shift into the conversation.
Yeah, and we were kind of really excited, I have to say, about this project, a really exciting subject. And one of the things we were thinking about, do you need qualitative or quantitative research? And I mean, it was a no-brainer, really, for me, that it was absolutely a qualitative piece. And the reason for that is we wanted to find out, one, if organisations were actually experiencing this polarisation within the organisation and what they were doing about it, and also how it impacted on psychological safety. So what we said is, right, what we want to do is have a really kind of open interview script here. We invited 20 senior leaders from across a wide range of industries, and we asked them to talk to us for 40 minutes with a very open script, a very conversational interview, just to find out really where they were on their psychological safety journey, if they'd even started, if they were in the middle or at the end, and then really to find out, as I said, the challenges that they were facing, particularly within that context of a polarised world. So that's why we chose qualitative research for this particular project.
And yeah, and just to extend our gratitude for all those organisations, individuals who kind of invested their time in helping us discover and build our insight. So just then, what's our working definition of psychological safety? And if you kindly move on to the next slide. Psychological safety, there's kind of an agreed understanding, but we just wanted to sharpen it up for the sake of this conversation, is when you and I would feel comfortable enough to say what we wanted to say, but without fear of being punished or humiliated for speaking up with these ideas and questions, or a concern or flagging a mistake. And because when individuals and teams feel psychologically safe, it means that they're happier, they make more intelligent risks, they raise concerns sooner, you end up staying on the team longer because you like it where you are. You're more resilient to change and external threats because your energies aren't focused on trying to defend or protect yourself. And ultimately, it results in a real improvement to the bottom line of your business because your energies are focused on getting the job done and done well. So that's our working definition of psychological safety. So if we kind of keep that in mind as we move on to the next slide, there's a moment really where each of us in our day-to-day work make a simple yet costly mental evaluation before we share a thought about something we want to do to innovate or improve an organization. And that evaluation is this: is it worth me right now taking the real and immediate personal risk of being critiqued by my seniors, by my peers or colleagues, if I suggest an innovative idea, for a potential and delayed benefit for my organization? In essence, an immediate personal risk versus a potential organizational benefit. What might you choose? And what would you choose to do if you knew the people around you, those colleagues, those seniors, those peers, held more polarized views than you did? If their opinion about how to handle a project, the market in which you operate, industry trends, not to mention the wider social views around politics or gender roles or economy or migration, or even vaccination, for example, they were radically different to yours. Would you take that personal risk for potential organizational benefit? And would you speak about an idea to challenge the norm and innovate? Would you share your concerns about a proposal that you just had a bad feeling about? We discovered in the research with Rebecca and her team that this is not happening. Essentially, people aren't feeling safe enough, often enough, to have those conversations to help their organization really realize the benefits of having those innovative conversations, which is why we're saying now seems a really good time to face up to those polarized challenges. So we discovered 3 clear strategies to address this challenge, and we'll explore them in today's webinar.
Thanks, Dilpazir. So that's the context of the challenge that we had, really. And all of that is baked into our research paper that we believe holds strategies and tools to help deal with this challenge and make the most of the opportunity, the clear opportunity there is out there for organisations to extend their innovation. And we're going to explore the key content of that for the remainder of the session. So firstly, what we ended up discovering throughout the research, and we didn't necessarily intend to discover this, but we found that all of the organisations that we spoke to were on the journey towards psychological safety. Some were at the beginning, some were at the middle, and some were at more advanced stages. And as the research developed, we started to see some real trends and similarities in what organizations indicated the characteristics they had for these stages. So these stages of psychological safety and maturity, as we've come to explain it, became a little bit clearer as we jumped through the research conversations. And you'll probably start to think, well, where's my organization on here? And mentally plot whereabouts your organization may sit. Now, what we do acknowledge is that this is not meant as a definitive A to B journey with a fixed endpoint. We know that psychological safety is far deeper and far knottier than us ever getting from point A to point B. We know that it will constantly need revisiting, refocusing, constant listening, and constant hearing from organizations as they move through this journey. And there's going to be different parts of the organization at different stages. So we absolutely acknowledge this isn't a simple fix, but it does give a reference point to start to plot at what point organizations or teams within organizations are on that journey. What we did also see as we moved through the research was there were a few key correlations that became more visible. Firstly, having identified the stage that organizations were on in that psychological safety maturity, that beginning, middle, or advancing, we started to see those organizations that were more advanced in the journey had higher levels of perceived innovation, both internally when we were asking them about innovation within the organization, but also what you would think of as an innovative organization externally as well. Now, that's probably not all that surprising in some respects, and it very much is in line with Amy Edmondson's founding work on psychological safety. But what was unexpected to us was the correlation that organizations with higher levels of perceived innovation, they were the organizations that were really embracing the, for want of a better word, we've used edgy conversations about these polarizing issues. And we saw organizations at the other end of the scale, where the organization was at the lower end of the innovation curve and psychological safety and maturity, would typically say that personal views get left at the door and this stuff just doesn't come into the organization right now. So we got to this point and we were thinking, well, this is all well and good, but where are the opportunities to learn from what these organizations at the higher end are doing, and how can we learn to create more innovation? How can we lean into and face up to these polarizing times, these difficult times for us all, because we never know what we can say or what we can't say, if we're going to offend someone or not. And how do we create the conditions for that psychological safety that we fundamentally believe our current reality demands more than ever before? And that's what led us to the 3 leadership opportunities that Dilpazir referenced earlier. And Dilpazir is going to kick us off with the first one.
I am, yeah. Just before we do that, I just remember Rebecca being in those interviews with you time and again, where listening to people who are sincerely kind of exploring psychological safety and still saying, actually, we're not finding people having these conversations about politics in the office space. So it's really kind of insightful. Yeah. So our leadership opportunities that we're going to explore today are essentially, these were the things that we found would facilitate shifting into a more psychologically safe space throughout your organization in order to have those, as you said, Andy, edgier conversations. Because by doing so, you're allowing people to kind of bring their whole selves into space, into the workspace, kind of be able to have that kind of jostle and kind of a trusting and fraternal relationship with each other, but still challenging and having those conversations. So some of the opportunities, the context of this was that the first aspect that we've identified was the role of hierarchies in organizations. So hierarchies play a really fundamental role in helping coordinate and organize a business. But what we found was actually some of the rigid and overly strict hierarchies were acting as kind of prohibitors and barriers to the free flow of conversation. So some people were finding that actually they weren't They didn't think it was their remit or their role to suggest something, because that's not their job. So we found that in that context, if you add polarization into that mix, it's a compounded problem, because first you're thinking that seniority is not my remit. And then also you're thinking that person doesn't hold my views and we don't really get on, we don't see eye to eye. So then you're unlikely to then say, actually, let's have this conversation about a project that you suggested. I'm sure with my expertise of 20 years being here in the organization, is probably not a great idea. You're probably not going to have those conversations. So one quote was really interesting about the interrelationship between having those edgier conversations and psychological safety. One of our interviewees said, when the US had to decide whether to vote for Biden or Trump, I know for sure the company was divided into two, but they left the political discussion outside the door. So they were not going to have those conversations in here. And there was kind of a missed opportunity. So what's an alternative then to the rigid hierarchy? We're not suggesting we remove hierarchy per se, but there's some interesting research, for example, from Korn Ferry's Future of Trends 2022. They call it the reinvention of the business models, where organization will become a bit more fluid, that they expect flatter, non-hierarchical structures and even more project-based working. Or this concept of networks of teams, where the organization just displays more agility in the structure to empower individuals to tackle problems quickly, but operating outside of the barriers of bureaucratic or siloed structures. So that both of those things require a strong degree of psychological safety. So that was the first thing we spoke about, was hierarchical structures. The second thing was about leaders inviting challenge. Now, what we found in our conversation is that leaders were saying, weren't they, Rebecca, in the conversation, I'm saying to people, challenge me if you want to, but they weren't getting the challenges they might be expecting.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. I mean, it's those big hierarchical structures that you've just spoken about before that were often preventing those as well. And some people said, well, yeah, so as an organization, we've put this into place, we've got speak up, but we're telling people to do this, we're telling people, and we're asking people to do it as part of the town halls that we have. But it's only actually when we do it and allow them to do it anonymously when they start to speak and they start to challenge. So already they were showing, yes, we're trying to be psychologically safe, but the fact that people will only challenge us anonymously is clearly kind of showing that we are not as psychologically safe as we would like to be. And a lot of that came when there were real hierarchical structures still existing within those organizations, and certainly when they were a lot more traditional on that spectrum too. And one of the reasons people were saying is that's where it was more difficult to change those mindsets for leaders as well. So the organization, the CEO, for example, might say, right, I'm really behind this. I'm a new CEO, I've come in, I want to move the organization forward. And I believe that people do need to challenge and speak up, but actually they have a lot of other people sitting on that team that might not have quite changed their mindset to the same level at that point. And one person was saying, actually, the reason for that is that they have a lot of ego at that point. And the reason that they have a lot of ego is they've got a heck of a lot of responsibility, and actually showing that vulnerability is really, really difficult for them. So to alter that mindset is very, very difficult, at which point they're not opening up and making people feel quite comfortable enough to enable them to challenge at that point. We did have some people, I'd say a lot fewer at the other end of the spectrum, who had started to really kind of create groups in order to challenge. They'd actually say, right, in every meeting, you've got to challenge, come on, like, come up with those sorts of things. And they were more of the kind of tech innovative companies there as well, that had a flatter structure, as Dilpazir was saying before as well.
And as we know, kind of people are really adept at sensing whether that information is genuinely there or whether there's still a little bit of a risk. And Andy, you and I were talking about in another conversation about, sometimes as leaders, you might share an opinion, and that to another person might be a really strong alternative opinion, which for them means that even if they shared an opinion, they would think they're challenging you, and that would be a real kind of a non-starter for them. So inviting challenge is a really delicate balance between offering it and holding that offer repeatedly and consistently.
Yeah, and it kind of links back to what you were talking about before, as the managers almost being the most important people to some extent, because those leaders are still in those kind of big hierarchical structures a little bit too high up for people to feel comfortable enough at the moment. Whereas with managers, that's when they started to open up a little bit more. It was there that they felt psychologically safer, I would say. At this
I was just thinking, Rebecca.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I'm just thinking, reflecting. I know as an organisation we've really moved to agile ways of working over the last couple of years, and I think they call it big A, don't they? Big A, little a. So the little A is the agile ways of working, but the big A is the kind of project management ways of working. And I think working in an agile way has taken away a lot of hierarchy, because the way an agile project management team would work, that absolutely remove that hierarchy. And I think we've been through a real journey over the last couple of years where so many of our managers have been through training around agile project management, because even as a manager you get involved in projects on a daily basis, and we find that's absolutely taken away hierarchy. Again, just reflecting on that as you were talking about it. So.
Yeah, it's a good point, Gary. And that leads us on nicely to leadership opportunity 3, which is really looking at how we can expand psychological safety more consistently to all parts of the business. Because what we were seeing was respondents were saying, well, there's certain teams that have got psychological safety in their DNA, but it didn't necessarily extend across the whole organization, or there wasn't that consistency that they were really looking for. And I'm going to paraphrase here. This wasn't exactly how it was said, but what we noticed was there was something along the lines of the difference with teams that had psychological safety versus those that didn't was that the manager gets it. They see the importance of psychological safety. They buy into it. They're emotionally intelligent. They're self-aware. They're a role model, and they exemplify the behaviors that create the conditions for psychological safety and these more edgy conversations, and their people follow their lead. So there was this big theme that came out around leadership behavior and people connecting to and understanding the importance of psychological safety, and then their behaviors showing through in terms of how they were connecting with their people. So that was one of the key findings. The other thing that came out in this particular piece was the importance of consistency in terms of or clearly refocusing values and giving clear guidance or guidelines and expectations for behavior. That was one thing, but the most important thing was that these things were monitored or rewarded. So the right behaviors were monitored and they were celebrated, or they were called out for not being met, because it's no good having the best guidelines in the world if those behaviors that are allowed to fester within the organization. So there's something about those things being called out, and a lot of that came down to the leadership behavior. Now, all of that really resonated with me with the work that Gary and the team at Legal & General have been doing around leading with emotional intelligence. So I'm going to bring Gary in a second to talk us through that story and the journey that they've been on, because I think that would be very valuable for other organisations that are out there. And whilst Gary's talking us through that journey, please feel free to fire through any questions in the Q&A box for Gary or for the other panellists. And we're going to have some time to cover those off as we get through the rest of today. So Gary, over to you. Tell us the story. Tell us about the impact that the Louis programme had and how that started to light little fires around the organisation and people started noticing.
Yeah, so I'll start off by saying you said the Louis programme. People probably think, what the hell is Louis? So Louis is Leading with Emotional Intelligence. It's what we ended up calling the programme. And I'm trying to condense the story, so you need to jump in, Andy, and shut us up. You know what I'm like. It started back in the end of 2019. We had a couple of members of our senior team. We've been looking at our engagement scores, and we built a really great coaching culture within the business. But we wanted to focus on our employee and our managers, our well-being at the time. And there was lots of different directions we were going in. But I think myself and Peter Coates, a colleague of mine, had recently been to an Oxford group event in London around the 5 conversations. And it really resonated with us because we thought, okay, we've been asked to focus on our people's well-being, surely creating or improving trust within our teams and having a psychological safer environment, surely that's going to have a big impact on our people's well-being. And actually, we didn't, to be honest, two and a half years ago, I never really heard the term psychological safety. However, there was a question in our engagement survey which was around, I can't remember, yeah, so it's, I feel free to speak out without negative consequence of self-image, status and career. So if we go back to the beginning of this presentation, that's absolutely something that we measured on a regular basis and something that we felt we could do a little bit more of. And yeah, to cut a long story short, we felt as if the 5 conversations would be a great program for us to roll into the business. What we ended up doing is we made a decision to become accredited to deliver that internally. It was a team of 6 of us went through that. And the reason we wanted to deliver it internally was we wanted to tailor some of the content to the business needs. And that whole emotional intelligence piece really resonated with us. So we actually, I mean, the 5 conversations is obviously around the 5 conversations, but we made it a 6-module program because we wanted to start off by exploring emotional intelligence in a little bit more detail, and that's why we call it Leading with Emotional Intelligence. And I think we were really lucky because at the beginning of 2020, all of our leadership team went through this program, and we made a decision to roll it out across the whole of the business. And then something happened, COVID, and it was all right. Okay, what do we do here? Do we wait till after lockdown to start running this program? But I think we did what was the right thing. We made the right decision to roll this program out. And just to put this into context, when we got accredited through you guys to deliver this, I think it was because we thought we were going to deliver 8 cohorts. A year and a half down the line, 2 years down the line, we've now delivered this to 80 cohorts of managers. And it's actually 150 managers have all been through 6 modules. And the impact it's had, well, I mean, I think I mentioned this, Andy, we've had 98% attendance on this program, which the word unprecedented has been used quite a lot lately. And I think for anybody that's watching this that works in L&D, learning and development, for us it had a massive impact because, as mentioned, 154 managers been through all these modules. But I think it's worth talking about the impact because we were really clear at the beginning of the program how we're going to measure the success of this. And it was our ESAS, our engagement survey scores, our speaking out survey scores. But also one of the questions we ask in our coaching survey on an annual basis is rate the level of trust that you have with your line manager on a scale of 1 to 10. Now, this is over thousands of employees, but the scores have absolutely gone through the roof. Our speaking out score has gone up from, well, in 2020 it was 64, in 2021 it was 74. So that's out of 100 that ESAS, that speaking out, which is linked to psychological safety. Our trust, because we build a really good coaching culture, our average trust that employees had for our managers is 7.5 out of 10. It's now just over 9 out of 10. So again, that is phenomenal levels of trust that our colleagues are saying that they have for their line managers. But also the engagement score as well. Generally, our ESAS score before we started this program was 74. The most recent score is it was 74, it's now 79. So in every area of the business, there's some clear metrics there that demonstrate that this has had a significant impact. I'll take a breath there for a second, Andy. You've got any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. That's great. And you forgot to mention, which I thought you definitely would, that it's the program's on an award, a learning excellence award, quite recently. So great accolade for the great output.
No, Andy, it did win an award. It won 2. Can you not remember? It was 2 we won.
Well done, Gary. Well done. So yeah, I mean, for me, that the focus on connecting with emotional capital and emotional intelligence and getting your people to connect with what are the components that allow you to do that and create that connection to help build trust in these really simple conversations has been the driver behind that that kind of psychological safety, the push and creation within the team. And having spoken to a couple of people that have been on the program, you know, you can see the clear impact that it's had. So it's great work that you've been doing.
Yeah, and you know something? I think the strange thing is, it's not rocket science. Yeah. It's just really simple techniques. I think a big part of it for us was challenging managers around their mindset. They might be saying, well, okay, I have one-to-ones with my employees every month. So-and-so who's worked for me for 20 years, he's not going to change the way he's working. He's not going to change his mindset. And we were like, well, he won't if you don't. And what impact will it have if you change your mindset about having slightly different conversations with him? And we didn't rehearse this, Andy, but I want a testament on you here. What was the best part of your weekend this weekend? Rebecca, I'll ask you the same question. What was the best part of your weekend, Rebecca?
The best part of my weekend was seeing my grandma and getting my little daughter to see her great grandma.
Right, okay. And Rebecca, what was the best part of your weekend?
It was spending time with some friends and going to the theatre, whom I haven't seen for a long time.
Okay, so even by me asking probably a slightly different question, because normally you'd say to your team on a Monday, how was your weekend? Yeah, it was really good. By saying what is the best part of your weekend, I've suddenly learned something new about both of you guys, about Andy having a child, about Rebecca, you enjoy going to the theatre, just by slightly changing the kind of questions we ask. And it's been that, I think, throughout the programme, that was a big standout for us. And that's what managers were saying. My God, this is not about skills. We've got some really great coaching skills. It's just slightly changing the approach to some of the questions that you ask. And someone will say, yeah, but they don't feel that natural. It's like, it doesn't matter. If it doesn't feel natural, does that really matter if you really get something off the back of that? Again, one of the questions that I've regularly asked, I run a talent program a couple of times a year. One of the questions I've started asking the guys on my talent program is, tell me something about you I don't already know that will help me get the best out of you. And again, some of the things, and they might really struggle with it, you allow a little bit of silence, and then they'll suddenly come in with a nugget of, my God, that's going to make a real difference to how I can get the best out of you.
Yeah.
So, and I think you're obviously aware that on the program, we would run a conversation, it might be building trust, and then we wouldn't have the next module for a month or so because we'd want them to practice that conversation. And then the next module will be spending 30 minutes talking about what worked, what didn't work. So I think it's that real evidence of putting theory into practice was quite clear throughout the program.
Yeah. And for me, Gary, the big thing that stands out there is you said, it's not rocket science. It's relatively simple stuff that just creates good human connection. And at its heart, that is how you create psychological safety. And there's different ways that you can rephrase questions and conversations and connections to go that little bit deeper if your mindset's right. And I think that was another really great point that you made there, Gary. So thank you for sharing, Gary. I'm sure we've got, we have got some questions for you a little bit later, but I'm going to shift forward now to our HERE model. So I'll hand over to you, Dilpazir, to run us through this.
Thank you so much. So we if you like, the journey we took was we posed a question, we worked with Rebecca and the team to try and understand what was going on the ground. We discovered that actually psychological safety in a polarized context is really challenging. And there are some things that would facilitate those things. So kind of looking at the hierarchy, looking at the invitation to challenge and seeing how we can expand the psychological safety from pockets of the organization to all of it. But we wanted to kind of wrap that up into something a bit more pragmatic and practical so that you as leaders can apply this in your space. And I know you mentioned something quite lovely about it's just about the human connection. So what is it that we can do as individual leaders to build that human connection, to allow other people to then kind of cascade those same behaviors? So we came up with kind of an internal set of criteria or actions in order for you to facilitate something externally as a leader. And we've summarized that in the acronym HEAR, hear yourself, so you hear others. And essentially, this is kind of a personal, an interrogative self-talk, kind of talking to yourself first, to allow you to kind of drop any biases or any inhibitions, or being really clear about your intention in order for you then to be able to hear and invite and understand what's going on within your team to make, therefore, those small human connections. So, for example, Gary, that lovely question about what was the best part of your weekend? There's an intention there saying, actually, it's not just a flippant kind of a passing question. I genuinely want to hear it. It's a question that invites you to think. And when you listen, you build a connection. So hear yourself before you hear others. Now, I'm going to quickly walk through what each one of these acronyms means. I shan't do any more than that. You can have the white paper for that. And there's lots of examples and what some of our interviews said about it. Honesty. So step one, we're saying is be honest with how you're feeling and the role you want to play to guide your organization. So if you're feeling a little bit defensive, just be honest with that. Just acknowledge that, put that in front of you, and then ask yourself, well, what role do you want to play to build psychological safety? And we noticed that every organization was on the path to building psychological safety. So we know it's an imperative, it's something that we all want to do. And then that will facilitate you being honest with the intention to listen and also share your own views. So when people ask the question, what's the best part of your weekend? They know that's a sincere question. And you're willing then to go, as Andy and Rebecca did, and I was watching them, to kind of just pause for a second and shall I say what I really want to say? And then I want to talk about my grandma, I'm going to talk about this, I'm going to do this. So there was that human moment there. The next step is to show empathy. And again, towards yourself before others. So show self-care with whatever you might be experiencing. You as a leader have value. It's not about dispensing of yourself, not about always putting somebody else first, or it doesn't matter how stressed or tired you are. As if, step one of first aid is to make sure you're safe, make sure you're well, because if you're healthy in and out, you're going to make for a more empathetic person to experience. And then to display empathy externally is to always assume that people are well-intentioned. So no matter how we might think or feel or react to that person's opinion or view, that's their sincere intention. They're not trying to say or do something to annoy another person without reason or cause. It's a view that they hold with sincerity. And the next step is about accuracy. So accuracy to yourself, that just be really clear about any biases that are affecting you, not whether or not you've got biases, but what biases are affecting you. And that all our biases are kind of there to help us function and navigate the world in an efficient way. And they become invisible because they become so useful. But in these moments, actually just being really accurate and kind of just being really clear about how they might impact you, the way you are as a leader. So maybe you're an introvert and you don't like that kind of open vulnerability, or maybe you're an extrovert and it's just you're creating too much energy and noise for people to kind of lean into. And then accuracy in hearing the facts over the feeling when you talk to people. So somebody might say their opinion about a social issue or a project that you have a real passion for, but what's the facts over your feelings? What are they saying rather than what you're feeling about what they're saying? And then the final step is about respect. You're a leader with many, many, many years of experience, with hundreds of events and projects and days that you've gone through and challenges, and you've developed wisdom and intuition through all that. And we want you to respect that. That's something you've nurtured from years of experience. So this is not about ignoring that, but this is about standing on that. And then once you show yourself that self-respect, so then also extend that to respect other people's views. So in all of in the papers glittered with examples of ways to create spaces for people to hear and connect to each other, reverse mentoring, pairing people up from different opinions, there's a beautiful, the word smush, somebody used, smushing people together. And throughout all of that is about trying to discover the commonalities rather than the differentiators. But in all of that, respect is not the same as agreeing. What we're not trying to do is create one homogeneous whole where everybody's the same. There was a really interesting conversation we had with Robin Wright, who also facilitated in the paper. And he spoke about actually there's a healthiness in creating friction, because in that friction, there's a spark. You get different vantages, you get different opinions. And in all of that, once you've got all of the hues and all of the colors blended together, what you're left with is a much more accurate picture of what would be the right thing to do. So in all of this, it's not about being really nice to everyone and nobody shares an opinion, but actually to do so respectfully, both to yourself and to others. So that, again, go to the white paper. It gives you loads of practical examples of how people are exhibiting those. those principles. But by adopting kind of a clear here acronym model, we think you'll be able to kind of get rid of all of the grayness in terms of what I should do as a leader, and to kind of just make this a bit more pragmatic. Andy, back over.
That was a really great run through. Thanks for bringing that to life for us. So we're at question time now. So we've got a number of questions here just to run through, and I'll point them at different members of the panel today. Gary, there's one here for you straight away, and it's about buy-in. You talked a little reference to senior leadership, and it sounded like they were really bought into what was going on. How did you achieve that?
Yeah, so I think that's been a real key for us. For the success of the program, because I think one of the things I guess we were looking for, they came to us asking us to find something that would support the well-being of our people. I think we've got years of evidence of the programs we've run have made an impact, so I think there's that level of respect which helped with the buy-in. But I think the fact that we got them to go through the program and they saw the impact it had on them as a group of senior people. And I know I've talked about this previously with you, Andy. I remember really early on in the program, one of our senior leaders, our senior stakeholder, attended one of the sessions, and he demonstrated a really high level of vulnerability during the session, sharing a little bit about his personal life and some challenges he was going through. That absolutely set the tone for the next 6-7 months of working with these guys, because it's our whole thing is that behaviour breeds behaviour. Because our senior team were demonstrating those levels of vulnerability between themselves, then they started to demonstrate that level of vulnerability with their the kind of the other managers and leaders within the business. It absolutely just, again, it's that vulnerability piece which is massive.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? That kind of exemplifying of, look, it's okay to do this, it's okay to be vulnerable. That shadow that the senior leader that you shared cast was, it's okay, and everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. That leadership shadow, spot on. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Rebecca, one for you. So it's kind of a question that talks to the polarization piece. So in the interviews, what evidence was there of polarization? What were the key themes that were coming out?
It was really interesting, actually, to hear people's views on this, especially because I don't think it's something that they really thought of in any great detail to begin with until we'd actually asked. And then I think some people were often talking about their own experiences as well. And I think that's where they jumped in to say, oh, I don't think I've ever spoken about politics. And that's because I don't really feel comfortable enough. Because I'm a little bit worried about the backlash that I might get. And then there was another side to it of saying, actually, a lot of this kind of political stirring has happened during the pandemic. And what we're not having is those water cooler moments that we might have had before, where it would have come up more organically as such. So there still seemed to be a lot of kind of holding back on sharing those political views, in particular when we're talking about politics. And where it had come up, and there were little kind of smaller pockets where people had heard about that, it might have been in their kind of US offices, for example. And when somebody had mentioned it, and that, for example, was on kind of Black Lives Matter, and then, hang on a minute, somebody said, but actually all lives matter. And the first reaction from the person who'd said all lives matter to was, excuse me, I think that they should be sacked. And immediately they started thinking, actually, that's not what we did, because it should actually be about education. But there was an example there that they were saying, well, straight away, we could see how emotive these views were, and how they stirred up the pot almost within the organisation there. So when somebody did feel comfortable enough to say something, there was a little bit of backlash there too. So it's how to balance it.
Can I jump in there? Andy, with it? Again, just a reflection. I think one of the things that we implemented a couple of years ago was reverse mentoring, and that's been really interesting because we've had representatives from our D&I committee been mentoring our senior exec team on age, mental well-being, work status, gender, neurodiversity, ethnicity, etc. And that's just, oh my God, that's opened up the floodgates in a really positive way to have real. I mean, our MD was reverse mentored by actually Delbert, who's on my talent program I run around neurodiversity, and that's just the impact that's had on the business by sharing some really challenging conversations. And that's absolutely been around the challenges that people have, not just generally, if it's someone neurodiverse, not just generally, but in the work, in work. And what that's created is the senior, our MD start looking at how we can recruit neurodiverse people because of the unique talents and skills that they bring that somebody else might not bring. And that's absolutely allowed us to talk about something that would maybe in the past be a bit more of a challenge to talk about.
Yeah,
just felt it was worth sharing that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Gary. I'm with you. You know, that just goes to show what can happen when we understand things from people's perspective more. So again, it really does come down to that human connection for me, for sure. Right, we got one quick one which I'll cover off, which was Gary mentioned 5 conversations. What are they? So 5 conversations is an Oxford Group program. It's all around creating trust, engagement, and performance. I won't say too much more about it, but if you want any more information, you can dive on our website. It's all about creating towards reactions so that people want to move towards you rather than you as a leader creating away from. You know, I don't want to go and speak to that leader because of this particular issue or challenge. So we can share more information on that if needed. Let's see, one more here. We've got one about, we think we're a psychologically safe organisation, but we're not having edgy conversations. Dilpazir.
So Rebecca, we had this experience quite a few times in the interviews that we did, that people feel that the place that you might, for example, where you work, everybody's lovely, everybody's really polite, it's always pleasant working atmosphere, but actually it's not a place where you have those edgy conversations. And so there's a danger here actually, is that when it comes to, you're just not used to having challenging conversations, you're just keeping it on the kind of polite. So it's kind of, it's like an in-laws paradigm. Excuse me for me to take kind of a fun personal example, but you might not get on with the in-laws, but because you don't have those conversations, it all seems very polite and nice. And kind of you leave the room, you're thinking, oh, what a complete, oh, that was really difficult. That wasn't a pleasant moment for me. And kind of, you have almost the same potential risk, if you like, in a business, where because you're not having those challenging conversations, it seems on the surface of it, everything is really fine. But actually, as you said, Andy, in kind of that hockey stick graph that we showed at the beginning of the workshop, is the edgier conversation is almost kind of a litmus test, almost an indicator of a relationship that's psychologically safe enough to have those challenging conversations, and are going to be then echoed in the business conversations where you say, actually, I think as an expert in this area, this is the better thing to do, and be vulnerable enough to then to be challenged and come up with a third, better, more refined idea. But yeah, we found that quite often.
Yeah, it was interesting, wasn't it? In seeing that, and people generally thought actually it is important. I should also say that people were saying, I do think that these edgier conversations should be had, even if they're not having them. And some organisations, certainly those that are a bit more progressive, were talking about, right, I've got a meal, I'm bringing everyone together, I've got my own seating plan, so people are not going to sit together with people that they naturally know, and we're going to make sure that they attend. And it might sound a bit cruel in a way, just making people attend this social, but what they really wanted to achieve was, you have to speak to other people that you might not speak to on a daily basis. We want to open it up. We don't want it to be about work, we want it to be about other things, so that they connect on a personal level, at which point they start to understand the person and not just the idea that they might have, or their beliefs and thoughts. And I thought that kind of really resonated when we were speaking to them as well.
Yeah, fabulous. So I'm kind of hearing it's about surfacing these issues before they become something bigger, and they just kind of work away behind the scenes and grow and grow and grow, and then all of a sudden you've got a bigger issue culturally, by not maybe tackling them. And I think from the conversations I was in on, that was what we were seeing in those organisations that were higher up that maturity journey. They were able to go there and have those conversations respectfully and openly. So thank you both for sharing that. Gary, one more for you here. What was the catalyst for the organisation focusing on psychological safety? Because you referenced a couple of years, I think 2.5 years ago, you said I haven't really heard of the term. So where was that catalyst? Where did it come from?
Well, it came from our engagement survey. Like I said, there was a question which is, I feel free to speak out without negative consequence. And again, we didn't use the term psychological safety at that time. But I think we talk about psychological safety through the programme. And even the book, to be honest, I know you might want to go on about the book, but the 5 Conversations book, a lot of our business areas have started up a book club to go into the 5 Conversation as a reflection in a little bit more detail. And the topic of psychological safety has just been talked about more and more. And I think it's interesting because what you were talking about earlier, Rebecca, I guess in answer to the previous question, I think we've seen pockets across the business. So I think there's about 11 business areas have been through this programme. And because we're looking at the scores of speaking out and satisfaction scores, in some areas there's been a significant increase. In fact, I made a note here, I think the biggest increase we saw in the year was 70-point increase from speaking out. In some areas it's only improved 3 or 4. And I think it is a little bit about the senior leader in that area. They all have slightly different styles, and obviously you need to be a little bit careful what I say, but I think there's that whole walk you talk, practice what you preach.
Yeah,
it's about what the leadership team and what certain managers are taking away from it. But I think what it's been really good for us is to go back to the manager and say, okay, where can we make further improvements in kind of the psychological safety scores. We call it the psychological safety score, but it's absolutely it's around that question of people feeling as if they can speak out without negative consequence. And our leaders do a phenomenal job of, and I know there's that term about not just opening the door, not just leaving the door open, but actually inviting people proactively to come in and give you that feedback. We have a senior leadership team who are phenomenal at that.
Yeah, and that really shows in how it has snowballed really in terms of its effect across quite a large spectrum of people. So some great work from L&G again. Okay, so we've covered off all the questions, which is great. So the panel can sit back and breathe a sigh of relief. So all it leaves really is for me just to share a few notices really, and that is that you can now download the white paper, be amongst the first people to download it. If you want to get ahead and download it, the link is on the screen there. In fact, you can just go onto the Oxford Group website, go to our insights pages, and I believe it's the first page that you can click through to download the paper now. It's live as of today. We will share it with you in a couple of days' time if you don't get a chance to download it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll be posting the recording from today there, and there's other recordings of other similar papers that we've done and similar content that might help you in that space. If you like what you've seen today, then register for our newsletter, because that's where we house all of our events that we're doing, any thought leadership or content that might be of use to you. So you can do that. Just go onto the Oxford Group website and scroll down to the bottom and you'll see a link to register for the newsletter. And then finally, you can find us in all the usual spaces, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube. And if you would like to just have a general conversation about the findings of the paper, both Dil Pazir and myself are very, very happy to take you through that in a bit more depth. So please do feel free to connect with us and take it from there. A big thank you firstly to the panel today, to Dil Pazir for co-authoring the paper, to Rebecca for your insight and support in terms of getting us to the stage that we're at now. We definitely could not have developed a piece that is so in-depth and thoughtful as we have if you hadn't worked so diligently with a number of our clients and contacts in that space. Gary, thank you for the great work you're doing at L&G. It really is genuinely inspiring. You know that I think that anyway, and well worthy of the award-winning status. I'm sure if anybody wants to speak to Gary in a bit more depth, you can hook up with Gary on LinkedIn, and I'm sure he would definitely share some insights. Fantastic. And finally, Michelle, behind the scenes, thank you for your support today. And lastly, to everybody that took part, which I know there's a number of you on today's session, thank you for your insights that's helped us get to this point. So enjoy the rest of the day, everyone. Take care. Hopefully see you soon.